So everyone should have got the pop-up for the recording. Kia ora koutou, everyone, and thank you all for being here, and welcome to Music Forum here at Te Koki, the School of Music at Te Herenga Waka. It's really good to see all of you here for our talk today, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Wellington-born Vaughan Hatch has been living in Bali since 1997, where he's been researching and documenting rare Balinese gamelan musics. In 2000, he founded Mekar Bhuana, a family-based center in Denpasar, directed by his wife, Balinese dancer Putu Evi, that actively documents, reconstructs, and repatriates rare and lost Balinese music and dance. During his time in Bali, Vaughan has been invited to speak at conferences, universities, and festivals in Bali, in Singapore, Canada, the USA, Holland, and New Zealand. Now in Aotearoa, New Zealand, he has recently established Mekar Bhuana Aotearoa, creating a Balinese gamelan community through courses and a number of different Balinese gamelan art forms. And it's a real pleasure to have Vaughan back with us here in Wellington and at Music Forum discussing his work over many, many years. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Vaughan, and we should have time for questions asked afterwards, and you can put your questions in the chat as you think of them, and I'll be monitoring the hand raise and the chat function as well. Vaughan, thank you so much for being here. Welcome, and really look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you, Brian. When most people think of Balinese gamelan, they will see in their imagination a large ensemble of metallophones, gongs, pot gongs, drums, and cymbals, all intricately carved and covered in gold paint. The music is fast, loud, and dynamic, and the musicians sway and smile in a uniform way. Perhaps they've been introduced to Balinese gamelan by a contemporary composer who has been invited to teach overseas. Here they may only learn what ensembles or musical ideas are currently trending in Bali. The fact is that there are actually numerous different gamelan ensembles. Out of these, there are just a handful that we can consider extremely rare. Now, these are the ones that I've become interested in during my time in Bali. Reconstruction is important for me on a personal level because I like to look at the details and the importance of these details musically and historically. Due to the history, these rare ensembles reveal a huge variety of tunings, instrumentation, and playing styles. They create a very different oral soundscape from modern forms that have been changed a lot over time. Secondly, at a community level, their ritual use may be essential to ceremony. They embody a sense of village pride, identity, and character. Finally, at a global level, this is lost knowledge. This is loss of cultural identity. This is loss of roots and historical examples that can be inspiration for young composers or any composers, and for development of music in Bali. So what's happened to this music, these instruments and ensembles? I've heard before the comment, it's dead because it's bad. Not only is that counterproductive, but that's a short-sighted comment. In Bali, music, instruments, and ensembles have disappeared due to multiple historical factors. We have to remember that Balinese culture is an oral culture with not much written history or documentation. So when there is a natural disaster and an entire village gets wiped out, with it is the oral tradition of passing music through generations. And there we may also lose instruments and entire ensembles. If you're familiar with Indonesian political history, you would have heard of the communist routes of 1965. In Bali alone, 200,000 people were murdered. Among these were gamelan musicians, dancers, and puppeteers. So there we lost people who had this knowledge and could have passed it through generations. Another important factor is academia. Academic institutions in Bali have created their own styles, and these are the ones that are easily accessible. Therefore, it's easy to find a teacher, it's easier to access recordings. And so that's what people know. Finally, globalization. Now, globalization means pop culture. It means pretty much American pop culture. It means pop music. And young Balinese are not immune to this phenomenon. You may think, how could instruments and even ensembles become obsolete? As I mentioned before, natural disasters, but there are also other factors, simple factors such as they may have got lost, instruments may get lost, or they may have been stolen. Also, sometimes if the gamelan group hasn't got enough members, then they may get left behind when they perform. And then over time, the instruments may get lost because of that. Finally, due to their materials, if they're made from wood or bamboo, but even with bronze, over time it goes out of tune. If it's left out of tune, then it falls out of favor. People don't like those instruments anymore. After researching and doing some basic gamelan music reconstructions in Bali for several years, I founded Mekar Bhuana Center. It has the aim of contributing to the survival of Balinese gamelan music. My wife, Evie, added the dance component in 2004 and became the director. During our organic development, we have been self-funded and so far sustainable, supported by both my Balinese family and by my family in New Zealand. The center is home to more than 20 gamelan sets of 12 different types. Most of them are antique and that I've personally restored and tuned. They are all Balinese except one antique historic Javanese set. Based on my own ongoing research in villages and overseas, we have reconstructed or revived more than 17 pieces of music, 22 instruments, 2 ensembles, complete ensembles, and tuned 2 historic gamelan sets in villages. Potential sponsorship, funding, workshops, cultural immersion programs, otherwise known as study abroad programs for groups overseas, and major performance opportunities all help us to create projects involving young musicians and dancers where they learn from senior maestros or from the results of my research. The reconstructed art forms are then recorded, performed, and repatriated in villages of origin where possible. We teach young people about the roots of gamelan, different historical periods, ensembles, instrumentation, and tuning, so that they have a more complete toolbox for composition. We protect the rights and sensibilities of traditional performing artists by ensuring that our musicians and dancers are respected and supported by the tourism industry in Bali, and that the tourism industry also makes a contribution. We also educate the general public about the connection between the arts, the environment, the fragile island environment of Bali, community, and general well-being. In summary, we aim to be a source of inspiration and knowledge for generations to come. As I mentioned, we've done many reconstruction projects, but for this lecture, I've chosen 4 unique ones that use different approaches. This project took place between 2012 and 2017, a 5-year period. It was a reconstruction of vocal music, and then transferred to Samara Pagulingan. Samara Pagulingan is a court gamelan that dates back to the 15th century, and it's found in 5, 6, and 7-tone forms, with the 6-tone form currently extinct in Bali. When I met Vaughan Hatch in 2012, he was 87 years old. And now I think he's around in his mid-90s. When I met him, he was super keen for me to learn and document all his tradition that he remembered so that he didn't take it to his grave, basically. During the period of 2012, 2013, he quickly became like family. I'd go to his house regularly, and he would perform with us. And then once we had reconstructed his music, he would continue to perform with us, even though he couldn't sit cross-legged on the ground. We'd give him a chair, as you can see in the video I'm going to play shortly. So the main art form that we documented is called Chap vocal music. Some of you may have heard of Kecap, which is a more modern form of this. Chap vocal music was used in his village of Kaliungo Kolod in Denpasar to express Samara Pugulingan music, because their village couldn't afford a Samara Pugulingan ensemble. He remembered this using a memory cue, as you can see in the middle picture there. He notated this in Balinese script, and then he transferred it to vowel sounds, because he didn't believe that Balinese young people at the time were able to read Balinese script. So using these memory cues, he would put the notation onto a drum in front of him, and then he would read this as he was singing and then playing the drum, as you'll see on the video shortly, which is incredible for an 87-year-old. And he continued to do this for many years. So this tradition he learned from his father, who in turn learned from his grandfather, and that's as far back as he remembers. And the piece of music that we focused on, that I'm focused on for this case study, is called Sudut Maru. This is a piece of music from a village called Nagari Batuan. This has the same origins as the famous Samara Pugulingan group instruments from Tegas Kangina. So this piece of music is originally in a 6-tone form, and he remembers the 6-tone form, and the structure of the music is tabupat. Tabupat is the same as tabukutus and gongade for its length and breadth. It's the longest piece of music known in Balinese music. It has an unusual structure, and it has characteristic drum patterns. So when he was teaching it to us, he expressed that we could interpret the vocal line how we wanted, and into what instrument. And so we decided to transfer this to the trompong, which is a row of kettle gongs. In the case of our Samara Pugulingan, that's a row of 17 pots. For the drum parts, we kept them exactly as they were, and then he left the interpretation of the other instruments up to us. So based on my research of Samara Pugulingan gamelan in the 1920s, we made the other instruments in a similar vein. So it would be in a more transparent style without interlocking patterns. So you'll hear on the recording that there are some differences in speed. Now, this is because when you sing, you tend to not speed up, but you will sing at a certain pace. Whereas with gamelan, when it's transferred to a gamelan ensemble, it's suited better to be slowed down. He agreed with this, so we could fit in all the parts. So you'll hear there's quite a difference there. There's also a difference in pitch, because he had a very unusually deep voice, and our gamelan was several pitches higher than that. I think 2 or 3 pitches higher. So it's going to sound different in that sense as well. Sudut Maru is a long piece, but Kak, we call him Kak Gunastra. Kak means grandfather, by the way. He remembered it only in an incomplete form. And this is one of his greatest laments, that he didn't learn the complete form from his father. And his appeal to the global community is that if we could find this piece of music before he passes away in complete form. And I've been trying for the past 10 years and I still haven't had any success. So if anyone is listening at the moment and they're able to find this piece, perhaps recorded it from another village or in an archive or even notation, then we can reconstruct the piece of music. The sudut maru is known in gamelan gambuh art forms. Unfortunately, it's quite different, so we weren't able to reconstruct from that. And it's also known in gong gede, Bali's largest gamelan, but it's also on a different form and has different skeletal melody. So let's have a look at the reconstruction process in a video form. The second case study is about five-tone Semarabugalian. Five-tone Semarabugalian is a type of Semarabugalian with just 5 tones, and it has different instrumentation from 6 and 7-tone Semarabugalian. So this is a project from 2017 where we reconstructed from a vintage recording and notation, so a different combination. The source was a commercially released recording from the Library of Congress of Bruce and Sheridan Farnstock's recordings in Bali in 1941 that I've been listening to since 1996. The recording was released in 1994. The village in question is recorded is Tegas Kanginan, but the actual original style of this music is from the Payangan Palace, and this is where Colin McPhee documented this piece of music and had it taught to his group that played on the instruments, those same instruments that were stored at his house at the time that he had rented from the Pliatan Palace. Now, the musician that taught this was a senior court musician called Lunyuh. So 2 of us at Mekar Bhuana studied the piece, and we analyzed the parts. Then we passed it on to a larger team of 6 musicians. You can see in the middle photo, 1 musician there is passing this on to other musicians in our large group. So then was in this photo, it's been passed on to a larger group of 30, I think it was 32 musicians or 38 musicians we had at the final performance. So the structure of this Tabugari version is really different from other versions, including those from Gamelan Gambuh, which is a related art form. Virtually all the instruments are played in a completely different way. And there is one instrument that is, until recently, has been extinct in Bali, but is heard on this recording, that's a kanong. This instrument is found in Javanese gamelan, but has a different, not a different function, but in Bali, there is only one instrument, whereas in Java, there are a number of different kanong in a Javanese ensemble. Interesting enough, we've only just recently reconstructed this instrument here in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, and we're using it while we're teaching our Gamelan Samara Patangian courses. So you'll hear on the recording shortly that the way of playing the lead trompong instrument is like really lively and in a sort of virtuoso style. Now, this is exactly how Semarabugalian should be played. Five-tone Semarabugalian should be played. It's not possible with the, say, 7-tone Semarabugalian because there is such a large range, a large stretch across the long instrument. And this is the style you hear consistently in the early 20th century. And now in the 21st century, perhaps since, I think around about the 1990s, this style has changed a lot. We had some issues with the reconstruction. The first thing is the recording is quite difficult to hear all the parts. The other thing is that there are some differences in the kendang drum parts from the three sections. So the three body sections. We found out that in another style of tabugari, in one of the gambul styles from Batuan, our lead musician, Purnama, he told me that in their village, they also have some differences from one section to another, which is unusual for Balinese music, because normally for body sections, the kendang patterns are the same. So I accepted this, and we learned this exactly as it was in the recording. If there are any mistakes, say with an accidental wrong note or something on a slower instrument, then we corrected that. We also added in some instruments to make the ensemble more complete, because our ensemble at Mekar Bhuana has additional instruments like tubular bells, additional pot gongs, and also now that we've added in a bamboo grantang instrument, which we reconstructed from a Kunst photo from 1924, I think it was. The piece of music also wasn't complete, so there's about 45 seconds missing at the end, and you'll hear that on the video that I'm going to play shortly. 45 seconds doesn't sound like very much, but when you're working from notation, we worked from McPhee's notation, and that's only the skeletal melody. We actually had to make up the trompong line. So the main melodic line, we had to make that up based on the skeletal melody. So when we're doing that, we're going towards the note, a bit like how you do improvisation in Javanese music. For the kendang patterns, we just based those on those from the body section. Now, the results, we performed these first at the Bali Arts Festival, and then on multiple occasions at local Balinese ceremonies, at temple ceremonies, and then most recently twice at the Bali Spirit Festival in Bali. We've also recorded this piece of music and released it on iTunes, Spotify, and Apple Music. So you can download it there. Another aspect of the results is that we taught the trompong melody to 3 musicians, and we taught the kendang parts to 6 musicians. So there are quite a number of musicians who can carry this on, and these are the most important parts of a gamelan orchestra to know for continuation of an art form. We haven't yet taught it to the village of origin because when I researched at Payangan Palace, they didn't know anything about it. They didn't seem to be interested in learning the music, and they didn't have the appropriate gamelan orchestra. So if that's going to happen, it would take quite a lot of work to be able to make that happen. In the village of Tagaskanginan, where it was recorded, they already have a different version. And one of the musicians from that village who used to be in Mekar Bhuana suggested that it would also be a lot of work to teach them the new version and be afraid of losing their current version. You got to remember, this has skipped a number of generations. So there was a gap of perhaps 20 years between World War II and then the reformation of the group in the 1960s. And so the art form has changed a lot in this village. So what we have here is a snapshot of a time period. complete reconstruction of that part that was missing. The full piece is about 6.5 minutes long, I think, and it's on iTunes, Spotify, and Apple Music. Third project is one that took place between 2015 and 2017. And this is about an old-fashioned type of orchestra that I call old-fashioned angklung. It's reconstruction from notation, research notes, and photos. Now, since Colin McPhee documented this ensemble extensively in 1937, it seems to have disappeared completely from the island. Now, there are also no recordings that I know of. If anybody knows of any recordings, contact me afterwards. And McPhee, in his book Music in Bali, describes the orchestras as one of strength and fullness, and that young Balinese musicians who accompanied him on his research trips found their old-fashioned orchestras utterly absurd. Now, these comments made me all the more curious. I really wanted to know what they sounded like, and there are no recordings available, so I thought, well, we can try to reconstruct. So I came across, I was lucky enough to purchase a antique angklung set, which need a lot of restoration, need to be tuned, needed to be really fixed up a lot. And I thought this is a good opportunity to reconstruct these lost instruments. So based on photos, I started with the reconstruction of the angklung rattles, which are also known as abonjing in the ancient texts. And the first time abonjing are mentioned in the context of Balinese history is in the 9th century. Now, there are 4 different types of abonjing in Bali, but we've reconstructed the 2 rarest types. The one that's in the photo there, played by a little kid, it's got 3 tubes, but one tube is in 1 octave, and then the octave higher has got 2 tubes, which are of similar tuning, but they oscillate together. And the other abonjing, there is one that we reconstructed that's got 4 tubes that I found in another McPhee photo. And it's got 2 octaves, but both of the octaves have oscillating tubes. So it has a really full sound. The other 2 types of Balinese angklung rattles have either 3 tubes and 3 octaves, so there's no oscillation, or just 2 tubes in 2 octaves. So normally a medium and then the highest octave, and they don't have the oscillation either. So I had a friend who was kind enough to make these instruments and then donate them to us. In return, I made him a practice instrument. We'll talk about our practice instruments later on, but you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a practice instrument. We produced these ourselves at Mekar Bhuana. I learned to make them myself, and they have had a lot of use in terms of repatriation and encouraging revival of music in Bali. So the second instrument we reconstructed is a chungklip, so the one played there, the second instrument, the right-hand top side in that display of 3 instruments. This chungklip instrument is played on offbeats together with the grantang below. Grantang is played on onbeats, and they both have wooden mallets. So it's different from the rindek, a common instrument in Bali, but that developed in the 1930s in Bali, that has rubber-headed mallets these days. These have wooden-headed mallets, so it has quite a percussive attack. And in the middle photo, I've got my 2 sons learning or practicing the parts, chungklip on the right and the grantang on the left. We didn't have the funding to have them all elaborately carved like this, but I guess it'll be a work in progress. This ensemble also has 5 sets of cymbals in 4 ranges. It has the large cymbal, Pinyala cymbals, Punanga, Chonge, it's a great name, and Kicha cymbals. And they go from a large size down to a very small, quite a small size. And relative to their size, they play different speeds. So the larger the size, the slower the speed. This orchestra can also have a trompong brook. Brook is means a coconut shell in Balinese, and it's an instrument that also has coconut shell wood. It's made from coconut shell wood keys, and then it has coconut shell wood resonators. This would be the lead instruments in these older ensembles, or it can also be replaced with the trompong krawang. Krawang means bronze in Balinese. And this instrument is still used in a handful of old angklung ensembles in East Bali. And it's used a lot in Lombok. So most angklung ensembles in Lombok use a trompong. In modern types of Balinese angklung, angklung klentangan, they no longer use a trompong. Finally, these old ensembles used to have gangsa jongkok, which means squat gangsa, and the keys are held on, are affixed with like nails and not hung, as in most gender type of instruments you see in angklung these days. So the process was that I, with my limited ability to read Western stave notation after not playing Western music for 30 years, was to learn the melodies and the different parts from McPhee's notation. Now, fortunately, McPhee notated very completely Western stave notation, and he had a lot of notes about how the instruments were played. So it was ideal for this reconstruction. It made it really possible. And so I slowly learned this in 2015, and then passed it on to our family group. So we had a family group of 10 of us, Evie's family, my wife's family, and this took about a year for us to learn a number of pieces. And then the repatriation process happened during a holiday, actually. So we took a trip to East Bali to have some time off, but then also to do a beach cleanup with a Trash Hero chapter, because we are involved with trying to educate about single-use plastic in Bali, and we have a chapter in our own village in Kertalango in Bali, and there are associated chapters in the island. So we went over to do a beach cleanup, have a holiday, and on the way back, we decided to visit Chulik village. And it was actually through our community work with education about single-use plastic that we got to know about the musicians from Chulik village. Otherwise, I don't think this would have been possible. It was really, really hard to find anything out about the village, whether the orchestra actually existed. So they had the instruments all sitting there ready for us, and I'm going to now play you the results. So it was a really fun thing to do as a family holiday, and we involved our two boys, and we educated the village about how the music is, because they've completely forgotten the music, don't know any of the music, any of the repertoire, and they hadn't seen any of the instruments except for the the rattles, which they still have some of the rattles, but they don't use them anymore. And what was great is that after a week of coming back to our center, the leader of the group sent me a video of them playing one of the pieces that we taught them on their instruments. And so, yeah, there's hope for them carrying on the tradition. I forgot to mention that you can, on each of these slides, you can scan the QR code to watch further videos about the reconstruction process or the results of the reconstruction process. In 2019, I was involved with a regeneration and repatriation of Selonding music from Salat village in East Bali. This was because of a request from the local branch of the Ministry of Culture, known as BPNB Bali, where the head of the department requested me to identify one of Bali's rarest gamelan art forms that still existed, but that could be documented in the immediate future. So they asked us to make a film about it, which kind of put us on the spot a little bit. But we did identify that this type of Selonding music, now Selonding is an archaic Balinese art form that dates back to the 9th century, and it's found all over, it was originally found all over Bali at some time. And there are many villages, particularly in East Bali, that still have a tradition. And each of these traditions is completely different from one another, not just in their repertoire, or the way that they interpret the repertoire, but also in the instrumentation, the tuning, and their playing style. So this set is characterized by very, very big keys. It has a very low tuning, and the keys are very big. So the largest key is about 90 centimeters long, compared with a more modern type of popular Selonding, known as the Tanganan Pagringsingan style, which only has 55 centimeter keys on the largest instrument. This is almost twice the size of those instruments. There are also a lot of keys in this ensemble, 87 keys, compared with the typical Selonding, modern Selonding, I say, that has just 40 keys. So it's more than twice the size. This ensemble also has a very large repertoire in this village. And the first time I saw it being played was by an elderly musician in 1998. Now, this gentleman has since passed away. He was apparently died when he was 104 or something, and he's passed it on to his son, who also plays it solo. He's the gentleman in the middle picture. In 1943, it was notated by Ernst Lager. Presumably, it was played by more musicians at the time. And then it was recorded in the 1960s, 1970s, and a film was made about the associated ritual in the 1980s. In our film entitled Nyejarang Swara, that you can watch and also read the booklet about on the QR codes there, we look at the connection of the music to the agrarian lifestyle and the rituals that are connected with Besakih Temple, because Besakih Temple, which is the mother temple of Bali, considers Salat village to be the rice bowl of Bali and to be their rice bowl, basically, for temple rituals. At Besakih, they also have a very ancient, a very old Selonding set that dates back to perhaps about 1236. And it's interesting because Salat village is allowed to request a replacement key. If any of their keys get broken or lost, they can request a replacement key from the mother temple. There's a strong connection there. In Salat itself, the art form dates back perhaps around about to the 13th century, according to the elders in the village. And there is only one musician who knows the repertoire. There are taboos associated with learning the art form because it is so sacred. Only musicians from one family from his family can learn the music. Fortunately, this can be extended to extended family, not just his nuclear family. And I found out during the film that females can learn. So his daughter was interested in learning. She is allowed to learn. The other taboo is that you cannot learn on the sacred instruments. There are 16 keys or 2 instruments that are sacred. You cannot learn on those. So you either have to learn on duplicate instruments or learn on the remaining 60 or so keys. Now, those 60 or so keys were involved with cleaning up, literally cleaning them up, scrubbing them down with wire brushes and things, with a team from the Polytechnic Bali, led by a lecturer, Tom Sutama, he's actually watching right now, is from that village. And at that time, we learned that almost all of the keys don't have casings anymore. So unless the set is reconstructed, it's a future project, reconstructed, then those instruments can't be heard. During the film, I decided to spontaneously make a practice instrument, practice keys myself. So I forged some keys out of iron, and then I donated them to the village. So there's 8 keys, and that's in the middle photo there. I think it was about 2 years later, I heard that Jiro Manku Suji, who's the gentleman in the middle who remembers the entire repertoire, he had a stroke. And this meant that he couldn't move his arms. So he wasn't able to play the music, which means the rituals cannot go on in the village. Fortunately, I heard a month ago that he's managed to go into rehab, and he's had some rehabilitation. He's able to move his arms, and he's now teaching again. So he sent me some photos through WhatsApp of them teaching, and they're actually teaching using the practice keys that I donated, but they've put them on one of the casings that they had made. They had one casing made with modern carvings and things, not really like a slonding instrument. They had that made, and so they can use that in a secular setting to teach anyone in his extended family. So it's really good. Let's have a look at the process of the reconstruction, and we've got to hear the recording that was very kindly sent to me by Duncan Sharaman, who's actually watching today. Thank you, Duncan. And he allowed me to send this to the village. Note though that when you compare it to the sound of the slonding in instruments in the film, that it's actually at a lower frequency, that's lower pitch. And that is because I think in the older recordings, sometimes they either move slowly or slower, or the result is a lower pitch. So let's have a listen to the instruments. And here I've picked a section where the lower instruments actually play the interlocking patterns, which is very unusual. I've only heard it being played in that way in this village. That last photo there is after he's had the stroke and then after rehab, and he's teaching on the practice instrument. So just looking at the upcoming projects we have, I want to continue doing things from the Farnstock recording. I got some access to the archive. We had to pay for it. It's the Library of Congress archive. There are some more Samara Pugurian pieces there. Second one is the famous set that was led by Wayne Lothring from Banjar Tegal. Sorry, I've just skipped the slide by mistake. Banjar Tegal, and there are some Samara Patangian pieces that are a really unusual way of playing that need to be reconstructed together with the entire orchestra, because even though I tuned that orchestra in 2017, I wasn't able to restore it to its original tuning, and it's also no longer a Samara Patangian orchestra, it's a gong kabiar. So that's quite a big project, and hopefully that'll be something that the Indonesian government can support. There are more Angklung pieces from these notations that we would like to learn and reconstruct and then repatriate to different villages in East Bali. With this Singi style of Samara Patangian, it should be over in Samara Buglian. The Samara Patangian is it's quite a rare repertoire. There's a large number of pieces there. We started this project many years ago. We still haven't finished it. It was due to lack of funding and also lack of resources at the time. And we would like to record this repertoire in the future. There's a palace style of Samara Buglian that few people know about, where there's a recording from 1965. We've actually learned, or I've personally learned one piece from this recording. There are a number of other pieces. They're very difficult pieces, and that's a project in the pipeline. We have one old instrument from an old and very old Samara Buglian, one instrument left, the row of pot kettles, and we would like to reconstruct the entire orchestra with an unusual tuning order on the gangsa instruments. We have started reconstructing a 6-tone orchestra. So far, we've only made most of the keys. We haven't finished making the casings. We need some financial support for that. And the concept of that is based on the Samara Buglian, only 6-tone Samara Buglian that I know of that's in the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam. Finally, during the pandemic, we purchased a historic Javanese gamelan orchestra from 1824 that needs a lot of restoration, needs a lot of love and care, and to bring it to life one day. And so we are going to work on that project in the next few years, and we'll need some to do some fundraising for that too. In the immediate future, we're just finishing off a new look website, so it's user-friendly on cell phones, because we realize that most people look at websites on cell phones, particularly young Indonesians. And it's going to be, again, in 2 languages, in Bahasa Indonesia and in English. During the pandemic, I've not completed, but I worked hard on my tuning library, and the tuning library at Mekar Bhuana is a physical tuning library. I believe it's the only one of its kind in the world. It's actually made up so far of 63 different tunings, many of them reconstructed from the work of Colin McPhee or Yap Kunst. And it's made up of physical instruments like the one in the middle there. So many of them I forged myself, and I have a small team that helps to make them. And so people can come to Mekar Bhuana and Denpasar, particularly people from villages in Bali that might have lost their tuning over the years, and they can come and request the tuning or try out the tuning and see if they like it. And then they can apply for funding to reconstruct their orchestra. The current project is 2 encyclopedias on Balinese gamelan. One is the Balinese Gamelan Ensemble Encyclopedia. The other one is the Balinese Gamelan Instrument Encyclopedia. They will be subscribable books from our website, and they're currently being laid out. So I've finished writing them, but they're currently being laid out. And so I'm not going to give a timeline when they'll be released, but hopefully within the next year. And I'm continuing also to write my my book on Gamelan Samara, which has been 25 years of research. And so the encyclopedia will be a prelude to that, to help people understand the different nomenclature in my 3rd book. Finally, Mekar Bhuana Aotearoa. Aotearoa is the Māori name for New Zealand, and it's a new chapter, a small chapter of Mekar Bhuana Centre in Bali. And the aim is to spread the word about rare gamelan ensembles and rare gamelan music. And currently we're opening courses in Samara Patangian, and we're also teaching Selonding. You can click our website there for more information, and the new website should be finished by around about October. Finally, how can you help? We will welcome donations and patronage with open arms. And yeah, any sponsorship, those sorts of things, we're open to that as well. If you are not able to help financially, then we need grant writers. We recently succeeded in getting our first Wellington City Council grant here in New Zealand by using a free grant writer from HUIA. So thanks very much, HUIA. And yeah, it's something that is historic for us because we've never managed to get grants in other countries, including in Indonesia. So it shows to us that grant writers do help. So if you're able to help us write a grant, able to donate your time to do that, that would be wonderful. Archives, if you have access to archives overseas, there are large archives in some countries overseas, and if they can be digitized, and digitalization costs money. If anybody can help to get this, to get these archives digitized, particularly if the original format is something that's fragile or can disintegrate, the time to do is now. We don't want to wait around. I know if Duncan Sharman is still watching, he's trying to get the archive in Fonoteca in Lugano, Switzerland, digitized. And so if anybody can help to make that happen quickly, then it needs funding. Because if we can put together all of our efforts to do this, then this won't be an issue for the future. This won't be a lost art forms. Yeah, so we've got to work together on this, and we hope that the global community can contribute. Kira, Brian, if anybody has any questions.
Thanks very much, Vaughan, for a really, really fascinating presentation. I'm just really impressed by this kind of community-based, projects that are ongoing involving young people in this. It's really wonderful to see. So congratulations on all of this work. Yes, we do have time for questions. So we're beyond the time for a music forum at the university. For those that need to go, that's fine. Because we are a Zoom event, we'll hold back for 5 or 6 minutes and take some questions. So let's open it up then for any questions. We do have some things popping up here on the chat. Dave, you need to go soon. Did you want to address your question now in the few minutes?
Sure, yeah, I need to go in a minute. I wrote it in the chat. I'll just summarize. There's really fascinating projects over a long period of time. I just love to learn about all these things and appreciate you sharing. I'm curious if you could tell us more. You were saying at some point, and I'm familiar that there's a lot of interest in kind of innovation and new compositions, and this is kind of like a revival, reconstruction that's a little different than that. So I'm curious if you could tell us more about what kinds of entities and organizations are really interested in these types of projects in terms of funding, giving time, resources. You mentioned some kind of grants that people can apply for. So I'm really curious, like, what's the kind of kaleidoscope of players who are interested in this?
But in terms of funding bodies, I'm not really sure actually, because I've often browsed UNESCO or Ford Foundation, but I've never really found anything that fits. There doesn't seem to be something like, do you do reconstruction of ancient or old music? And if you do, we've got this money, something like that. It always seems to be something that's very, very specific. Yeah, I find that quite hard to navigate. And so whenever we've put in, what's the word, expressions of interest into large funding bodies like that, it doesn't seem to fit, and we don't get a reply. And so that has been consistent for the past 25 years. In terms of perhaps say modern composers or contemporary composers, they might have more success applying for a grant where they can learn, come to Bali, learn about these traditions, maybe be involved in volunteer work in our work or in research documentation, and then they might get support in that way, because they to make new compositions inspired by the reconstructed music or reconstructed instruments or a completely reconstructed ensemble. That might be an approach that's more accepted by funding bodies. Yeah.
So, I guess my question is more about how has it happened? Obviously, there's a lot of time and energy and money, resources going into it. And like, you mentioned like people want to reconstruct their tuning from a particular village. Like, I'm assuming you're not the only person interested in it. So I guess my question is more around how is it actually happening? Who's doing this? And like, is there widespread interest across Bali? You know what I'm saying?
So you're saying, how did we do it, or both? How did we do it, and how are people doing it? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, kind of like, how does it happen? You know, does a village come to you? Oh, we lost this tradition. We would love your support. And then who provides the resources to make it happen? That kind of thing.
Okay, so I try and answer this in the most succinct way. We have done it pretty much 99% with our own money. So we haven't been successful with any grants except for ones in New Zealand in the last 6 months. So yeah, there's been the only time we've had support from the Indonesian government is with basic festival performances, which any group can apply for, and also with making the film Yudirang Suara that you saw before. So they wanted to make a film rather than that was in the sense that was going to be a direct support funding to go and reconstruct things or regenerate in a village. Your other question was how do other people, so do villagers come to us? On very rare occasions, but most of the time we come to them and we tell them that we have these resources. The thing is about villagers, once they've already changed their style or they've got new generations of musicians, or there's been a hiatus like 20 or 30 years between losing something and trying to revive things, then things get forgotten, and also things become quite difficult to do so. For example, if they've lost a characteristic drumming style and they don't have anyone who's virtuoso enough to learn that style or wants to put the time in to learn that style, then that style is probably not going to come back. They're going to look for the easy way out, which is perhaps to learn the art school style. And how was I going to say I'm just trying to think about how this would be with a community group, like for example, they're called Banjar in Bali. If there's one person, the thing about communal cultures is that there's one person who wants to make a change, it's going to be very difficult if the rest of the people don't support them. So we might connect with one person, they go, oh, that's a really, really good idea. We want to reconstruct this instrument or this whole ensemble, something like that. Well, then if they don't have the support of the village, it's not going to happen. Whereas we're an independent organization, my wife and I run it. So if we say we want this to happen, we're going to try and make it happen no matter what, because we want it to happen. So in that sense, it's a slow process. Although I think if you went into a village and you said, we have this funding, this is what's going to happen, then I think people will kind of not go along with it, but they'll do it. It'll happen. But that hasn't ever happened before. It's just something that just hasn't happened.
Cool. Thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Vaughan. I wonder, just extending that, can you talk a little bit about responses from young people, playing and engaging with this music? What kind of responses have you had over the years?
I think the response has been really, really good. The proof of the pudding is that the people who are attracted to our center are mostly young people from different villages. So they hear from word of mouth, or they come and say, how can I learn? Because we don't charge people to learn. The only way they can learn really is to come and be part of one of our groups. And the only thing we ask from them is that they have discipline with time, commitment, things like that. And in terms of the actual villages themselves, I think response has been wonderful. Let's take example of with Chulek, when we talk with our family, the kids just crowd around, sitting on the wall, watching, particularly our two boys, like helping to teach, where our eldest son was teaching. And they're fascinated. They're sort of on their phones a bit, taking photos and videos and stuff, but they're really fascinated by that. I think also the thing is that people find fascinating me as a foreigner. I don't think that I've had a lot of negative feedback about that. And I'm sort of answering your question in a bigger way here, but I think that people have seen that as something that they respect, and they really find that a contribution to Balinese culture and Balinese art forms. Because the fact of the matter is that a lot of foreigners come to Bali and they take advantage of Bali being Bali, and they make money from it, and they sort of take and don't give a lot, basically. And so I think the young people are fascinated by foreign people, also a lot of people want to learn English, and they like it that I engage with them also in Balinese, and I try to understand, but not just to understand them as Balinese in the old times or something like that, but I sort of understand them as young people. And that's why I was saying we want to have resources that are in a central place. So we have on a website or something that's updatable, that young people can download these resources, subscribe to the resources, and have them updatable and have them on their phones. So they're not reading boring books or that sort of thing, you know. So we try to relate in that way where we try to keep it cool and light, but it's still really serious material. But making them feel proud as well. So if we learn the art form and their village is perhaps not ready to make that step to reconstruct the orchestra or something, is that we reconstruct the orchestra at La Center, take it there, perform on it in front of them, and then they'll be like, well, we've got to do this, it's so cool. You know, so there are different ways to approach it, but I think overwhelmingly the response has been really positive. We've had those also examples of me researching a village, meeting young people, and then at the end of the research day or the week or whatever, how long I've been in that village, then I say, I see you run Mekar Bhuana, could I join in? And then so we have this added component to our center where we have a musician from that knows a rare style of music. And then when they go back to the village and they tell them about Mekar Bhuana, it's like they get more and more young people. It sort of snowballs. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Vaughan. Do we have any kind of like a final question out there? Not seeing any hands go up. And if not, then we'll say thanks very much to Vaughan for the really interesting presentation. Really wonderful to have you here in Music Forum, and really appreciate hearing about these projects. And feel free to get in touch with Vaughan for further conversation and chat. Thanks very much, Vaughan. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Brian. I can be contacted by email, also WhatsApp. I always pick up the phone if you want to give me a call, and then you can click any of these social media QR codes here. So you've got Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And then don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our videos. There's a lot of content on there. Kia ora, Brian. Thanks very much for this opportunity.
Good, Vaughan. Good, everyone. Thanks very much. Vaughan, you can stay back if you want for a minute, and everyone else, thank you very much.